It has been over 15 years since we were first introduced to Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, and the underbelly of the Albuquerque methamphetamine trade. And even after all this time, people are still diving into Vince Gilligan's beautifully crafted neo-western criminal world. Online debates still range from theories, villains and true motives, but today, on The Missing Protagonist, we'll be asking, what would have happened if Walter White never got cancer? As a quick disclaimer, this will be part 1 of a multi-part series. While I don't usually like to stretch these videos out, with Breaking Bad, it's inevitable. To stay true to the channel mission, I have to remove Walt from the start. But as any fan of the series could already see, very little happens without Walt. So part 2 will carry the same concept forward, but starting from the beginning of season 2. So in that instance, at least Walt has got the ball rolling. A potential part 3 is on the horizon, along with a Better Call Saul episode, so if that appeals to you, hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you won't miss it. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get into it. Breaking Bad if Walt never got cancer. Firstly, we'll take a little look at the White family, primarily our main protagonist/antagonist, Walter White. Without his cancer diagnosis, Walt would have had no reason to break bad in the first place, plain and simple, but let's break this down a little bit. As previously stated, without Walt's diagnosis, the White family would just continue on benignly. Walt continues his work as a chemistry teacher and a car wash attendant, disgruntled and unsatisfied with his life for sure. But without any primary ignition, I just personally can't see the well-to-do Walter White that we see at the beginning of season 1 ever breaking bad. Walt as a character at the start of season 1 is bowed and beaten down, under the thumb of his wife, his boss at the car wash, and the punchline of jokes by his far more boisterous and combative brother-in-law Hank. It's Walt's journey through the Albuquerque criminal underworld that exacerbates Walt's negative personality traits, slowly transforming him into the ruthless Hiesenberg that we all know and love. But here, this does not happen. While it is possible, however, Walt would eventually accept a job from Gretchen and Elliot. It seems to me that Skylar and Walt would have attended Elliot's birthday party regardless of his cancer diagnosis, with Skylar particularly pushing for attendance. Had a friendship been rekindled, it's likely Walt would have ended up swallowing his previous grievances in exchange for a more comfortable position with the impending birth of his daughter Holly. It's worth remembering, when Elliot first pitches the job offer to Walt, perhaps a more higher up position than he'd realistically be offered in this timeline, Walt appears to act gracefully at first. He seems happy, almost ecstatic. His only real protest or issue was his time away from such work at such a high level. It's only when Elliot mentions healthcare that Walt's elation turns to venom, seeing the offer as charity and not the merit of his mind and previous work, as previously insinuated. Moving on to the rest of the White family, it's likely Skylar would still return to work at Beneke Fabricators as we see in the show. But without the fighting at home due to Walter's second life, it's unlikely Skylar and Ted would have had an affair as they did in the original timeline, especially once Ted's crooked bookkeeping came to light. Unfortunately in this timeline, Skylar would be unable to keep the IRS off of Ted, eventually resulting in Ted's imprisonment and Skylar once again losing her job. Otherwise, I believe she would have been able to keep Walt under thumb until at least the birth of her daughter Holly. And Walt Jr. just does Flynn shit. Hank and Marie continue on as they had prior to the events of the show, with Marie having troubles with her shoplifting and her delusions of grandeur, and Hank continuing to work with the DEA on the ABQ meth scene. With no blue meth to obsess over, Hank likely continues to be an extremely competent DEA agent, but without the big cartel bust in Tuco, Hank likely wouldn't have been transferred to El Paso, staying in Albuquerque, and inadvertently hindering his own investigations into the cartel through his continued use of his rat, Crazy 8. Now Crazy 8, as shown to us in Breaking Bad, then in more detail in Better Call Saul, was Hank and Gomez's personal snitch. However, Saul, Lalo, and the Salamancas had all played this off to their benefit, with Crazy 8 regularly reporting on rival dealers, including his own fucking cousin. This allowed Hector's branch of the cartel to essentially operate in plain sight, while being able to have the DEA shut down any rivals and competitors. Now, it seems that Crazy 8 appears to have taken over management of Tuco's territory, perhaps while Tuco was either in prison or laying low. Without Walt or Jesse killing Crazy 8 and Emilio, Crazy 8 would remain in this position, allowing Tuco and Hector to stay in the shadows, leaving the Salamanca family far stronger, which we'll get into shortly. Moving on to other groups, Don Bolsa and Don Eladio and the rest of the cartel most likely continue to operate as usual, with no major changes in the Cold War with Gus, as Gus is not being granted any opportunity via the blue meth to take out his rivals. Saul also likely gets to carry on, raking in the millions as a crooked criminal lawyer. Without ever entering the Hiesenberg saga, it's likely that he never reconnects with Kim Wessler, unless some unforeseen circumstances rekindled the Jimmy McGill, rather than the Slipping Jimmy or the Saul Goodman we've all come to know and love. His associates such as Huel likely staying under his banner at the strip mall. Todd Alquist likely remains working for Vamonos Pests. As a minor player in the criminal underworld, Jack Weller and his gang continue about whatever operations they had prior to the Breaking Bad series, which, in all fairness, we get virtually no information about. Either way, the meth trade is off the book for Jack's gang right now. Moving over to Lydia and Madrigal. Without Gus's death and the DEA crackdown on his operations, primarily caused by Walt's movements, Lydia, Peter Scholler, and the Madrigal contingent continue unimpeded as a silent part in Los Pollos Hermanos' illicit activities. Jesse's crew, Combo, Skinny Pete and Badger, likely remain nothing more than addicts and users. With Jesse being locked up or a bit player upon his release, I cannot see him actively attempting to expand his network and bring extra dealers in under his charge, considering the events that have just happened. Jane, fortunately for many hardcore fans of the series, never dies of a heroin overdose in Jesse's apartment, potentially living out a long full life, continuing on her sobriety. Now, moving on to Gustavo Fring. Other than a lack of opportunity to strike its cartel rivals, biggest hit to his entire operation is 3%. That 3% that is missing from Gail Bettica's recipe to Walter White's, and the blue colouring, is all that would be missing in this timeline. But without the blue meth causing such a stir on the streets, Gus's meth would likely remain the most pure on the market, meaning the loss of Walter White would hardly be felt. As far as his wars with the cartel and the Salamanca, they would continue cold for now, without any Jesse Pinkman, Walter White or Ignacio offering up the opportunities that we have seen Gus capitalise on within the original series. I think I've covered all the major players here so far. I'm deliberately omitting some of the side characters as I think they'll be far more relevant to cover in the next episode. If you enjoyed the video guys, be sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's take a second to look at another beloved character whose life would have been vastly altered. Jesse Pinkman. Firstly, Jesse would have found himself incarcerated alongside Emilio. Without Walter White joining Hank and Gomez and then encouraging them to go and see the meth lab, Jesse wouldn't have been able to make his escape. From here, I see 3 possibilities. 1. Crazy 8 bails him out just as he did Emilio. This makes the least sense to me, so we won't explore it for very long. 2. Jesse's parents bail him out, likely meaning an end to any illicit activities on Jesse's part, at least until he inevitably ends up homeless. And 3, which I see as being the most likely, Jesse remains in prison. While any other major drug organisation would likely bail out a major liability in the likes that we see in Season 1's Jesse Pinkman, lest he spill his guts, he's in a very awkward but unique position. Being a low-bit player, it appears the only real information he had on anyone of value to the DEA would have been on Emilio and Crazy 8. And with Emilio bailed out after being caught red-handed, and Crazy 8, the DEA's personal rat, who provided the information in the first place, this information would have been of no value, leaving Jesse with no hope of making bail. And with a maximum sentence of 10 years, it's likely Jesse would have spent a long time behind bars. Having covered most of the major characters, I think I'm going to leave it here for today guys, and I'll leave everything else for the next video. As always, if you've enjoyed, like and subscribe, feel free to check out any of the videos on screen right now, and I'll catch you on the next one.